In this video, you're going to learn about the for statement, which is an alternative looping mechanism. So it's an alternative to using for each. The for statement, also known as the for loop, is great because it doesn't require us to have array data. For each is a method available on arrays, so we have to have some sort of array in order to work with for each. With the for loop, we get a whole lot more flexibility. What I'd like to do is mess around with it down below. Then we'll create an alternative to the for each code above. Then you will use the for statement over in the todo.js file. So let's go ahead and kick things off with an example. For this example, let's imagine you want to do something 3 times. Maybe you're trying to print the top 3 scores for players in your game, or maybe you're trying to count to a specific number. So let's say I want to print a message like this one, counting, ... followed by the current count 1, and then I would count up to something like 3. So counting 1, counting 2, counting 3. Now, obviously, if I only wanted to count to 3, I could add 3 console.log statements in. But now let's say I want to count to 1,000. You don't want to add 1,000 console.log statements in, and we also can't use a for each method call unless we had an array with 1,000 different items. So if we did want to do something like this, run a code a specific number of times, we don't have a way to get that done. With the for statement we do, so let's go ahead and mess around with that. Let's start off with the reserved for keyword. Then we set up a set of parentheses. We'll talk about what goes in there in a moment. And then we set up our code block. So the code block is the thing that is going to run X number of times. And we determine how many times we want this to run by providing the configuration details right inside of the parentheses. There are 3 things we provide inside of here. The first is an initializer. The second is a condition. And the third is the final expression. So let's go ahead and talk about all 3 and actually set this up. We're going to have it count from 0 to 2. So 0, 1, 2. The initializer is where we set up the initial count. So if I'm trying to count from 0 to 2, I need to create a variable whose value is a number 0. If I wanted to count from 2 to 0, I would create a variable whose value is 2. So this is where we start things off and initialize that count. You can think of a for statement's count kind of like the index. It represents via a number at which iteration in the loop we are. So let's go ahead and start at 0 by creating a new variable. Let count equal 0 perfect. Now this is just the first of 3 things we have to provide. Right now we have a count starting at 0. The next thing we provide, the condition, determines how long the loop should run. We specify the condition right inside of the parentheses along with everything else, and to separate those 3 pieces, we use a semicolon, just like this. So we have our initializer followed by a semicolon, then right here we add our condition. The condition should be true if the loop should continue to run. The condition should be false if we should stop looping. In this case, we determined that we want to stop after the count is 2. So if the count is 0, 1, or 2, we want to run the code to actually print our little counting message. But if the count reaches 3, we want to stop because I don't want to loop on forever and create an infinite loop. So right here, the condition, if the count is less than or equal to, in this case, if it's less than or equal to 2. So that would pass for 0, it would pass for 1, it would pass for 2. When this reaches 3, this condition will result in false and the loop will actually stop. Now the third thing is just as important as the first 2. This is the final expression, and this is where we actually modify the count. So right now the count never increases. With the final expression in place, we'll be able to increase the count by 1 for every time the loop runs. So once again, after the condition, we add another semicolon, and we provide the third thing inside of parentheses, the final expression. Right here, we're going to set count equal to a new value that is count plus 1. Now we could use count minus 1 if I was counting down, and since we're just taking a number and incrementing it by 1, we can actually use the shorthand. So that could be replaced with count plus plus, which has the exact same effect. I could also use count minus minus if I wanted to decrement by 1 instead of increment by 1. In this case, we are indeed trying to increment, so we're going to use count plus plus. Now, we're going to break down exactly how this runs, don't worry, but we do have to put something inside of here so we can actually see some sort of value printing when we run the script. All I'm going to do is console.log the count. So let's go ahead and just dump the count's value to the screen. I'm going to save notes.js. Over in the terminal, we're going to run that script node notes.js. And when we do, what do we get at the bottom? We get 0, 1, and 2. So here we are indeed seeing our for statement run 3 times. It runs once when the count is 0. It runs a second time when the count is 1. And it runs a third time when the count is 2. It never runs again for counts greater than 2, such as 3. So let's go ahead and actually break down what happens when this code runs. When our JavaScript code runs and we get to the for statement, what happens? We first run our initializer. This is what sets up the count variable, and the initializer only runs a single time, regardless of how many times the loop runs. In this case, the loop runs 3 times, printing 3 numbers, but the initializer only runs once. From there, we move on to the condition. We check the condition and see if the value is true. If it is, we're actually going to run the code for the very first time. So in this case, when we first start, the count is 0. We then check the condition, is 0 less than or equal to 2? It is, so our code executes printing 0 to the screen. After the code executes, the final expression runs, incrementing the count, then we move on to the next iteration. So once again, we check the count. The count is now 1. Is 1 less than or equal to 2? It is, so we run the code, printing 1, then we increase the count by 1. Now the count is 2. Is 2 less than or equal to 1? It is. So we go ahead and run the code with the count equal to 2. After the code runs and 2 prints, we increment the count to 3. Now we check the condition again. Is 3 less than or equal to 2? No, it is not. So the code doesn't run, the for statement completes, and we move on to whatever code would be down below. Now in this example, we are counting from 0 to 2, but we could always reverse that. I could count from 2 to 0 by starting the count off at 2 and reversing the condition. So I will check if the count is greater than or equal to 0. Then I could go ahead and decrement the count instead of incrementing it. So now we are going to count in reverse. If I go ahead and save the program and I rerun the file, what do I get? I get 2, 1, 0. So that's a quick rundown of how we can use the for statement. What I'd like to do now is talk about how we can use the for statement with arrays. So what we're going to do is use the for statement to recreate the functionality from for each up above. Let's go ahead and knock this out. We're going to create a new for statement down below. We set up our parentheses and our code block, and then we're going to configure things. Let count equal. Now, where are we going to start the count? Well, I'm going to start the count at 0. 0 being the index for the first item. After we initialize count, we can go ahead and set up our condition. Now, the condition in this case is going to take the array's length into effect. So we're going to keep running if the count is less than the array's length. So let's say we're trying to loop over the notes array from above. Right here, we would put notes.length. Next up, we add our final expression. In this case, count plus plus is going to get the job done. Now, there are a couple important things I want to talk about related to this. First up, it's important to note that the count variable created is scoped locally to the for statement. So I can create one here, count, and a one above, count. If I try to access count down below, like console.log count, it would not be in scope. It is locally scoped to the for statement. The other thing I want to analyze is this condition right here. So let's imagine we have a notes array with a length of 1. So we only have one item we want to loop over, which means this code is only going to run a single time. We start with a count of 0. We then check our condition. Is the count less than the length? Is 0 less than 1? Yes, it is. So this code runs once for the very first time, count being 0. After the code runs, we increment the count value. Now the count is 1. Is 1 less than the note's length, which is 1? No, 1 is not less than 1, so we would stop and continue on running the rest of the program. So this is what we set up if I want to do something for each item in an array. Now we can go ahead and actually print the item. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to access it using the bracket notation. So I'm going to grab from the notes array a specific item by index. Now we have access to the index. It is stored in the count variable. So right here, I am pulling out the individual item, and this is going to happen for each item in the array as the count increments. Let's go ahead and actually dump this to the console so we can see that. console.log. I'm going to wrap our previous expression inside a parentheses. Then we can go ahead and save the program and run things from the terminal. I'm going to use clear to clear the terminal output, then the up arrow key twice with the enter key to rerun things. And these 3 lines, these are related to what we have from this last for statement. The first line, note 1, prints. The second one, note 2, and the third one, this is now the new note 3. Notice that these 3 values we're getting are identical to the 3 values we were getting up above when we used the for each method. So when we use the for statement with an array, the count becomes the new index. We then use the bracket notation to grab the item by its index from the array. Now the cool thing about this is I could count in reverse. What if I wanted to print those items, printing the third one first, then the second, then the first? We could go ahead and get that done as well. Much like we did above, we want to start from the final position. So if I want to start from the last item in the array, the count needs to equal notes.length minus 1. Now remember, if there's only one item in the array, the length is going to be 1. If we subtract 1, we get 0. That is the index for the first item. The next thing we do is reverse this condition and then change it. So I want to only continue running if the count is greater than or equal to 0. If it's greater than or equal to 0, then we're going to continue running. Otherwise, we'll stop running. Then we just use count minus minus. With those few small changes in place, we're now going to be able to count in reverse. I'm going to use clear again. I'm going to rerun the notes script, and what do I get? I get my third note, then my second note, then my first note. So when we use for each, we have to have an array and we have to count from beginning to end. When we use a for statement, we have a bit more flexibility, making it a great tool to have in our tool belts. Now I want to give you a bit of experience using the for statement. What you're going to do is use it over inside of the todo.js file. What I'd like you to do is print the exact same stuff we're printing above with for each. The output would be something like the following. Right here, we still want to print the items in order. So we have number 1, order cat food, number 2, clean kitchen, and we would continue on until the end of the array. In this case, I happen to have 5, so the last one should be 5.space exercise. All right, take some time to knock this out using the for statement, then test your work by running the todo.js file. Take a moment to pause the video, and when you're done, click play. All right, how'd you do? Let's go ahead and kick things off by using the for statement right here, for. Then we're going to set up our parentheses and we're going to set up the code block. Now in this case, we want to count from beginning to end. So I am going to start off with a count whose value is 0. Let count equal 0. The next thing we provide after a semicolon is the condition. In this case, I want to keep running as long as the following is true. Count less than, in this case, to-dos is the array, so to-dos dot length. The last thing we provide inside of parentheses after another semicolon is our final expression. We're counting up from 0 to the array's length, so in this case, that would be count plus plus. Now, inside of here, we have access to that count value, and we can get the exact same information that we had been printing above. We're still going to set up a console.log call, and I am going to leave this as a template string. Just like we did above, we're going to calculate the number. So const, not in uppercase though, const num equals, in this case, it would be count plus 1, since we have the count variable and not the index variable. Then we could also create a variable for the individual item, for the to-do. This was not necessary. Maybe you used bracket notation inside of the template string directly. Either way works. Right here, though, I am going to grab it. So we're accessing something from the to-dos array. We're going to grab it by index, and the index is stored in the count variable as a number. Now we have both of those pieces of information, just like we did up above, and we can set it up the exact same way. So first up in the template string, I have num, then I have a dot space, then at the end, I have the actual to-do. Perfect. That's all we had to do to knock this challenge out. Let's go ahead and test things out by heading over to the terminal and running clear to clear the terminal output. Then I'm going to run node todo.js When I run it, what do I get? I get the exact same thing printing twice. I have it printing first for the 4 items using the for each method. Then down below, I have it printing again using the for statement. Now, when I set up the challenge, I said I had 5 items. I forgot I actually deleted one in the code right here. That's why we're seeing 4 as opposed to 5. So there we have it. That is the for statement in a nutshell. Now, obviously, we don't need to loop over these arrays twice, so we're going to go ahead and remove the duplicate code. If I have an array and I am counting in order, I like to stick to the for each method. If I don't have an array or I'm trying to count in a different order, I'll use the for statement. In this case, we're counting in order and we have an array, so we can stick with for each, which we had before. So I'll delete the for statement. Then we can clean this file up as well. Right here, we can remove the for statements we had set up since we are working with the notes array and we are counting from beginning to the end. If you want to learn more about the for statement, you can always find it on the MDN documentation by Googling MDN for. If I run that Google search, it's the first one right here. Here it talks about all of the things that we just talked about. It talks about those 3 things down below. We have the initializer, the condition, and the expression, and we have the code that we actually run. That's the code that we had inside of the curly braces. Like with all of the pages, it comes with various examples that should all look familiar by now. All right, that's where we're going to stop for this one. I'll see you in the next video where we're going to continue to talk about and work with arrays.